Hello brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all staying safe during this quarantine and having a fantastic week. And it's a big one today because we are going to be going through the ups and downs of Joyner Lucas's debut album titled ADHD. Now, as I suspect is the case with most people who aren't like die-hard Joyner fans, my first exposure to Joyner Lucas was his I'm Sorry music video back in, I think, 2016. That song just hit me hard on a number of levels, and the mixtape that it was on, 508, 507, 2209, had a lot of great songs on it. Ultrasound, Lovely, Winter Blues, Lullaby, I Need More. Great songs with great hooks and great lyrics. When he puts his mind to it, Joyner has a real knack for invoking incredibly strong imagery and building complex narratives on songs like Ross Cappuccioni and the aforementioned I'm Sorry. I, like many of his fans, was extremely excited for this album to drop, even though it took an incredibly long time to get here. But we're here now, and we're going to be going through this song track by track to determine which songs are ups and which songs are downs. Unfortunately, we have to start this review off with a down because this introductory skit is really weird. It's this mental health professional giving an 8-year-old Joyner Lucas a Rorschach test, but by the end, as Joyner starts giving more disturbing answers, the doctor starts berating and verbally abusing Joyner. Now, I know there are therapists out there who can be negligent and borderline abusive to their patients, but this just feels unnecessarily exaggerated, and for reasons that I'll get into later in this review, I don't actually believe that this really happened to Joyner. If this skit had maybe been a little more grounded in realism, I maybe would have given it a pass and possibly given it an up. But as it is, listening to it just made me really uncomfortable and not in the way that I think was intended. So now with that out of the way, we get into the first proper track of the album, which is called I Lied. And this is a very solid track. I'm gonna give it an up. This track is Joyner Lucas kind of lamenting all the ways that his money and fame has changed him over the years, even though he promised that if he did blow up, he wouldn't let that change him. And I like that idea. I like his vocal delivery on this track as well. It's really raw, it's really emotional. He sounds genuinely regretful of the fact that he didn't keep those promises that he made. And that brings us to Isis, featuring Logic, the latest hip-hop remix craze. And while I wasn't crazy about this song as a single, I do think this is one of the better songs on this album, so I am gonna give it an up. Take that for what you will going forward. If nothing else, this beat is fire and worthy of the endless parade of remixes that YouTube rappers have given it over the months. Lyrically, though, it doesn't have much teeth to it, outside of a couple good lines in Joyner's verse. I like that line where he talks about his old high school teacher. That was pretty good. And Logic's flow is good, but again, nothing lyrically to write home about. So with all that in mind, this is a very tentative up for me. And nothing tentative about this one, though, because This War, featuring the Prince of Sorrow himself, Young Thug, is undeniably a down. This is Joyner Lucas doing his very best Ty Dolla $ign impression over a very clunky sounding instrumental with an incredibly overbearing bass line that just dominates this mix. Joyner's lyrics are also really embarrassing. But the thing that puts this track past the point of saving is, of course, Young Thug. Young Thug is the opposite of bacon. He makes everything worse. And the next track is another skit by Chris Tucker, of all people. He's basically telling Joyner to get off his ass and release this album, telling him to stop using his ADHD as an excuse for being lazy. And I actually love this skit a lot, so I'm gonna give it an up. I like how it shows how Joyner's ADHD actually affected the album that we're listening to. I thought that was a very clever device to throw in. The unfortunate part is that it really is never explored or expanded upon for the rest of the album. But this could have been a much stronger narrative device for the rest of the album and really give it a better sense of cohesion. But we'll get into more of that later because this track leads directly into the song I Love. And I think I'm in the minority here, but I actually like this song a lot, so I'm giving it an up. I just like the hook. The beat is great too. The 808s punch you repeatedly in the face in the best possible way. And this was the very first single for the album, released like a year and a half ago now, and I loved it back then, and I still love it now. Devil's Work is next, and I had to think long and hard about whether or not I could up this song, because on one hand it does come across as real and genuine, but also it's basically bargaining with God to kill other human beings who Joyner himself has deemed deserving of death. It's a slippery slope, but if I'm being 100% honest, and I have obviously no intention of doing otherwise, I do appreciate where this song is coming from, so for that I'm gonna give it an up. The beat is good too. I like the instrumental a lot. I'm a big sucker for a nice vocal sample to build a beat around. But this does also come across as a very genuine cry to the heavens, asking our higher power to make sense of all these seemingly senseless events like shootings and deaths of bright young people. It doesn't just feel like a clumsy attempt to score woke points. It just feels like the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a man who is angry, confused, and quite honestly has had enough. The next track is titled Lotto, and this was another one of the many singles that Joyner released for this album. Like half this album got released as a single at some point, which is weird. But this song, I don't know, but I know I don't like it. It's a down. The song isn't bad, it's just strange. Like, why is he counting in Spanish in the hook? Why is he kidnapping children in the second verse? One of the lines in the track is click clack walla walla bing bang. No. Not a single bar in this song is witty or clever or meaningful or good. It's just fluff from start to finish, and I have no idea why this is even on the album. I don't like bad songs, and I don't like stupid songs, but the one thing I hate from any artist above anything else is just wasting my time, and this song is probably the biggest waste of time on this project. And the next track is a skit with Kevin Hart for some reason, and unlike the Chris Tucker skit, which I actually thought played a clever role into the barely held together narrative of this album, this skit doesn't work at all. It's getting a down. And the reason this skit doesn't work for me is simply because I just agree with Kevin Hart, even though I'm clearly not supposed to. Like, he starts off by saying that he's not impressed with Lotto, which, yeah, sounds fair. And then he just lays into Joyner I guess, for not paying him back on a loan that he gave him. And when I say lay into him, like, he really laid this on thick. But yeah, you should pay back a loan. If someone loans you money, you should pay them back. Like, that's just standard, I would think. I mean, unless he's unfairly taking advantage of the fact that you don't have money, then in which case that's bad. I mean, come on, you just rapped about how you won the lottery on the previous song. Goldmine is also a down because this is just basically Lotto with even less energy. The one thing I could say to this song's credit, though, is that lyrically there is an interesting narrative buried in here somewhere. You have to look really hard for it, but it's there. But this song also has one truly offensive line. If she don't like me, then she must be gay. Really? In 2020? Mr. I'm so woke, I'm bargaining with the almighty to trade Tommy Lahren for Michael Jackson is rapping lines like this. Piss off, will ya? That line alone puts this song in the down column, but the rest of the song is a slog in its own right. The hook is awful. Joyner's voice just kind of blends into the background with this lackadaisical reverb-soaked instrumental. It's just a lo-fi, muddy, musical puddle. This song ain't no gold mine, it's just fool's gold, and you're a fool for listening to it. The next track is Finally, featuring Chris Brown. Now, you can say what you want about Chris Brown and what you think about guys like Joyner Lucas who continue to collaborate with him, but the fact is Chris Brown and Joyner Lucas have done good work together in the past, which makes this song very perplexing. I mean, it's a down, but not because anything Chris Brown does. In fact, I actually think he's the one bright spot of this song. The beat is really bad. Again, it's annoying, it's repetitive, and the synth line that it's built around is awful. But this is easily Joyner's worst performance on the album so far. He tries to deliver his own hook leading into Chris Brown's part when you could have just had Chris Brown deliver one hook, and that would have been fine. But the disconnect between Chris Brown and Joyner is like they were performing two completely separate songs, which is weird because these two actually do have good chemistry, but it was nowhere to be found here. 10 Bands is next, featuring Timbaland of all people on the beat. And I actually like this song, so I'll give it an up. Timbaland is just a fantastic producer, and that does not change here because he made a fantastic beat on this track. This beat just adds new interesting sounds at every turn, and Joyner even has some decent lyrics on here, and his flow is pretty good throughout. I just like this song because it's interesting, and it's honestly different from anything else on this album. Nothing on this project sounds like this. It's a fun way to kind of break up the monotony of the last few tracks preceding it. And boy, did we need something to break up this monotony. Revenge is next, and this song is pretty good too, so I'll give it an up. I like how it starts out, Joyner kind of crescendos into the hook by increasing his volume and intensity in his delivery. It should go without saying by this point that we've completely abandoned the concept of ADHD that this album was running with, which, can you abandon something that was never really there in the first place? But this song just has a level of passion and intensity which you can scarcely find on any of the songs leading up to this, save maybe for Devil's Work. This is probably the most focused song on the album, so I give it credit for that. And that leads directly into the final skit of this album, the comprehensive evaluation by our old friend from the beginning of the record. It's still really weird and uncomfortable, and it's still a down. This skit is basically a last-ditch attempt to get the narrative we started out with back on track, even though by this point the album has completely fallen off the rails. In this skit, the mean doctor from before tries to give Joyner Lucas lean and cocaine to treat his ADHD. Like, why did I have to listen to this? Did this happen to Joyner? Does this happen to people in general? I don't know, but all I know is that this just has no place on this album at this point. And the thing is, this skit probably could have worked in a way if maybe it was placed earlier on in the track list. He could have gone on later to talk about how some people use drugs like lean and cocaine to cope with mental illnesses like ADHD, and you would have had a naturally progressing narrative to build on for the rest of the track list, like how those drugs ruined him, or how he bounced back, or how he became addicted to those drugs but managed to bounce back in the end. But as it is, this skit is completely superfluous and may as well just not even be here. And we finally get to the title track of this album to remind you that after 11 songs of not talking about it, that yes, Joyner Lucas does in fact have ADHD. This was another pre-release single, and the first time that I heard this song, I honestly thought there was a Post Malone feature on this track. I'm not even kidding. Joyner sounds exactly like Post Malone throughout the whole track. The resemblance is actually uncanny, and anything that sounds like Post Malone is getting it down for me. But funnily enough though, this song is the only song that actually goes into detail about what he goes through on a daily basis with his ADHD. He talks about choosing not to take medication. He talks about how other people perceive him and his illness, and just generally how he feels every day. There are some filler bars on here, but for the most part he actually manages to put together a compelling and emotionally engaging song. But the blatant ripoff of Post Malone is just so distracting, especially for a guy who doesn't like Post Malone. And honestly, it's too little too late at this point for this album. Next is Still Can't Love, featuring King OSF and Fabulous. I don't really know who King OSF is, but I've heard of Fabulous. At this point, I'm just fed up. This is clearly a filler track. Joyner's lyrics are recycled from previous tracks on this album, I think. I think King OSF is on the hook, and he honestly doesn't do a bad job at it. But Fabulous is pretty clearly phoning in his verse. But yeah, I'm done by this point. This song is unnecessary. It didn't need to be on the album. It's not really about anything. It's not for anybody. I just don't care. It's a down. Oh my god, we still have 2 more freaking tracks on this album. The second to last track is Joyner's Love Letter to Will Smith, produced by Crank Lucas, which, good for him, that's a pretty big break. But this is a fine track about celebrity idols, specifically about how Joyner's idol growing up was Will Smith, in case you didn't get that from the copious amounts of Will Smith references. Now, I personally am not that big a fan of Will Smith, so I didn't really relate too much to this track, but I think the track is more just about having good role models in general for your life and promoting the idea that it's okay to look up to your heroes. And the Will Smith references are a bit over the top and do get a little overbearing at a certain point, but I think this song's heart is in the right place and its intentions are admirable enough that I'll give it an up. And the final track is Broke and Stupid, featuring a motivational speech by what sounds suspiciously like the mean doctor from the Evaluation skits. And while I did like this song as a single, I don't really think it works as a closing track on this album, so it's another down. The song is basically a victory lap for Joyner Lucas about how he got rich and famous, and he talks about how the money never changed him, it just changed the people around him, which is a direct contradiction to the song I Lied that started the album. You know, where he spends the entire song rapping about how he's sorry that he let the money and the fame change him. This is really just a cherry on top of what has been a really messy, incoherent hodgepodge of songs that have no narrative thread going through it at all. That was ADHD, and boy, where do I even begin? This album is a failure on a number of levels. It fails to tell any kind of a story. It's a failure in basic songwriting. There are so few bars on this hour-long project that stood out as genuinely witty or clever or poignant in any way. The lines that did stand out did so by being embarrassing or straight-up offensive. And you could argue that the reason that this album is so unfocused is because ADHD does that to people. It's harder for them to focus on one idea, as I understand, when you have ADHD. And that would be fine if it were intentional, but that intent never comes through. There's no device inserted in this album that makes it clear that that is in fact the intent of this album. And the energy level just takes a nosedive around the halfway point. It was a struggle to get through the middle section of this album. And that's what really killed it for me. By the time we reached the last leg of this album, I had just thrown in the towel. I was done. But this album is also a failure on a marketing standpoint too. Joyner really killed his own hype by releasing so many singles to this album. There's 18 tracks on this album in total, and he released 9 of them as singles. And 4 of the tracks are skits, so you take those away, the audience only received 5 new songs by the time this album came out. So at that point, what incentive do they have to even buy the album when all they're getting is 5 new tracks? And it's upsetting to me because I know Joyner Lucas can and has done better than this. He knows how to write good lyrics. He knows how to write good songs. He knows how to build narratives and sustain them through a full project, which makes this album all the less forgivable and all the more frustrating that it sounds as badly thought out and as low effort as it does. And I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to like this video and subscribe to the channel, it would help me out a lot and I would be very appreciative. And give this video a share too, that would also help out the channel. But if you don't want to do any of those things, that's fine. Just you watching till the end means a lot to me. And as always, have a blessed week and we will see you in the next video. I'm still working on that outro.